Chris Elston, or maybe better known as Billboard Chris. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and have a nice long conversation about this.
Absolutely. Most people listening to this will know you. So let's just do like a quick overview. What do you do now? Who is Billboard Chris? What kind of mission are you on here?
So, I'm a dad of two girls from the suburbs of Vancouver, Canada. And I have been on this mission for a few years now, 3.5 years, just to raise awareness about what I consider to be the greatest child abuse scandal, certainly in modern medicine history. This business of, first of all, putting this idea in children's heads that they might have been born wrong and need to be something they're not. That's abusive. But this business of giving kids puberty blocking drugs, the opposite sex's hormones, and doing surgeries on children, especially in the United States, where that's more prevalent. It's happening in Canada too, but it's happening even more in the US. And this is child abuse. There's no such thing as a child born wrong. The positive message we should be sending is that our children are beautiful just as they are, and they don't need drugs or scalpels to be their true selves. So the ideology is the root of this evil, but this medicalization of kids, this business of doing childhood sex changes needs to come to an end. So I've been trying to raise awareness about this for 3.5 years, traveling the world.
Yeah, so that I'm curious to know, what were you doing before 3.5 years ago?
I was dressing like this every day as a financial advisor. So I've done the traditional career path from investment advisor to crazy sandwich board guy standing out on the street, having conversations and getting assaulted by Antifa.
Man. So take me back 3.5 years ago to the point that you decided to leave your traditional career path and go do the Billboard Chris stuff. What was going on in your brain and your family?
So my family's not affected by this at all. I'm a bit of an anomaly in that way. Most people fighting this have had some personal experience. I did not, but I'm a dad of two girls. They are 12 and 14 years old now. So they were coming up. When I started reading about this, it was 2019. So what were they, 7 and 9? And I came across this term puberty blockers online, and I thought, what the heck are those? And I looked it up, and of course, these are exactly what they sound like. These are drugs which are being used off-label to halt the natural development of children. These drugs have only been approved to treat prostate cancer in men, endometriosis in women, uterine fibroids. They're being used off-label because they happen to stop puberty, because they stop the testes from producing testosterone, and they stop the ovaries from releasing estrogen. These hormones, which come at the onset of puberty, are what trigger our secondary sex characteristics to develop. So girls' breasts will grow, their hips will get wider, boys' penises will grow, bones get stronger. That's impacting children's bones. These drugs are impacting their bones as well. They're losing bone density at a time they should be getting stronger. Some small studies show that it's causing IQ to drop. One study with children, one study with sheep showed cognitive decline. It's impacting other organs, and they're sterilizing kids because these drugs and hormones combined are sterilizing kids. They're turning children into lifelong pharmaceutical patients, forever reliant on some exogenous source of hormones. And for the boys, Marcy Bowers, the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, admits that none of the boys who started on puberty blockers at what is called Tanner stage 2, that's the beginning of puberty, none of them as adults have been able to have an orgasm. So there's all sorts of stuff going on here. The whole thing is abuse. It doesn't help these kids. We now have 6 countries which have conducted systematic reviews of all of the evidence. First Finland, then Sweden, England, Denmark, Norway, and now just yesterday, Germany announced that they reviewed all of the scientific literature. And they found that, of course, none of this was helping children with their mental health. So if it's not helping them with these struggles that they're having, what the heck are we doing cutting up and sterilizing kids? This is totally insane. So to answer your question, I went on a big rant there, as I tend to do. I learned about this, and the more I learned, the crazier it got. And I wanted to learn about this to protect my own kids, because it's primarily girls who are being affected by this. This is a social contagion being fed by social media, and now schools, and the media, and the government, and the WHO, and all these different corrupt, captured medical organizations, they're all pushing this nonsense that we have a gender identity that might be different than our sex. And then if you don't transition, you won't find true happiness. But I see this like a cult that has infiltrated all of society, and I wanted to protect my own kids from it. But the more I learned, I just felt called to do something about it. I could not stay silent. I wasn't going to look back at my life as an 80-year-old man and say I knew all about this. And I knew I could do something, which I did. And I did nothing. Because that's just pure cowardice. And I don't want to send my girls into this crazy world that doesn't even know what a woman is and is trying to change the sex of kids. So the first thing I did was I actually put up a real billboard. I followed the lead of a woman in England who had put up a sign at the Edinburgh train station that said, "I heart J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author." I love J.K. Rowling is all it said. The world's greatest children's author. And some people on Twitter complained. This was July of 2020. And the government-run train authority took it down the very next day. So I got tired of us not being allowed to talk about this. And I said, screw that. I'm going to put up a billboard that says the same thing in Vancouver. So I did, right heading into the downtown Vancouver on a very busy street. I put up this big billboard. It got paint bombed overnight. And then the next day, a Vancouver politician, one of our woke Vancouver politicians, said it was hate speech. And she pressured the sign company and they took it down.
Oh, wow.
I was ready for that. I leveraged all the outrage online because this went a bit viral. And I did a quick little fundraising campaign. And a week later, had a billboard up in San Francisco, and then Portland, LA, all throughout Utah, all throughout the metro in Washington, D.C., and then Times Square. That was my September of 2020. I was really busy. I didn't sleep a whole lot. Lost 16 pounds. Couldn't sleep. Too many things happening. And then because I couldn't work with any sign companies in Canada, none of them would work with me. They're all too afraid.
Wow.
I said, well, they can take down my billboard, but they can't take one off my back. I know my rights. So I had some made. And at first I was going to hold them, but that's kind of a pain in the butt. So I just had some holes put through them and I wear them. And I know I look ridiculous, but I wear a blazer and stuff to try to balance that out. And oddly enough, I get respect. But I started having conversations with people because that was always my goal. We need to have millions and millions of conversations about this, because as soon as we do and people become aware about this issue, different people with their skill sets and their passions will fight this themselves.
Yep.
And that's happening now. And we've had some spectacular success the last 2 years, especially.
Well, you mentioned something there that I want to ask you on a personal note. How do you handle this? This is a tough topic, especially having kids of your own, and you're doing this daily. I mean, are you like a yoga guy, a whiskey guy, or like what how are you managing this?
I don't drink. I think that probably helps.
That probably does help.
At all. And I don't do yoga. I just have a strong conviction and I know what's right.
Yeah.
And I don't care what people say about me. What do I care? What some strangers on the internet or what some politicians somewhere say or what some fake news media outlet says. I don't care. I know who I am. I'm a 48-year-old man. Am I going to worry about someone's opinion who doesn't even know me, who's never met me? Not at all. My wife and kids know who I am. Those are the only 3 people who need to know and whose respect I need. And I have that. So whatever.
Did you feel that way going in, or have you learned that take as your audience has gotten bigger? Because for me, it feels like the right way to do it. And then you get then you get a little bit of an audience and some negativity, and it affects me on the first day, even though I want to be where you are. So
I knew that going in.
Yeah.
And I was prepared for the hit pieces and the lies and the slander and all that stuff, which comes. And, in a way, you're taking on the world here. You're taking on many of the most powerful organizations in the world. And it sounds totally absurd to think that some normie from the suburbs can do that. But what do? I just have one conversation at a time, because you can't change this in a day or a year or even a few years. You have to come into this prepared for a long battle that might take a generation. I don't think it's going to take that long. The ideology itself will have to fight for much longer than we will this medical abuse. But it's just one day at a time. And when I first started heading out on the streets, I wasn't filming anything. I might take a picture just to let people know I was out there, but I was happy just talking to people, because those parents, especially that I was talking to and educating them about this, I knew they'd be able to protect their own kids. And for me, that's a purpose-driven life. That's a day of work well done. I'm not just chasing money. I'm actually trying to do something that's positive for the world. But it's when you think about this, and I did plan this out a little bit, there's only one way to go. It can only go up. And of course, there's going to be crazy people who come at you because you're outside, you're downtown in a busy city. There's all sorts of people out there. And every time they try to get angry or attack me or whatever, that backfires. And it elevates this message even more. And it shows all the normies out there. You've got this calm guy trying to have conversations. And then you've got all these angry, mentally ill people attacking him, trying to use violence to silence him. And without even knowing the issues, they already know who's on the right side of that argument. And, I know if I talk to 1,000 people, maybe 2 of them are going to become active themselves in fighting this. And that's what happens. And events happen and you get more followers and you get some more media. And it's not that hard to generate media. They're always looking for content. So there was only one way for this to go, and that's but up. And a lot of people are learning the truth. And now this is the number one talked issue, certainly in the culture wars on conservative media every day. And people have learned what's going on, whereas they had no idea in the beginning, and they're never going to unlearn that. So they're never going to stop fighting. And it's simply a matter of time until this child abuse is finished.
So I want to ask you about a bunch of different angles of this stuff. But before we really start, since I haven't read a ton about it myself, could you help me with some basically definitions? So what is gender ideology? What is transgender, non-binary, gender dysphoria? I'm just throwing out ones, but you tell me what are the important definitions to get out there so that listeners are on the same page as you and I.
Sure. So gender ideology is this belief system, this quasi-religion that we have a gender identity, and that gender identity might be different than our sex. So what is a gender identity? It's your personality. That's all it is. We don't have gender identities. This is nonsense. I had this debate with Google Gemini the other day. People can look that up because it sums up this whole thing perfectly. Trying to get Google Gemini to define these terms. And Gemini ended up admitting that it was contradicting itself and basically apologizing to me and saying that it itself was giving circular arguments because there is no such thing as a gender identity. It's just your personality. If you look at the most used resource in the world, it's this cute little image of a gingerbread man that has been produced by activists, and they call it the genderbread person. And it defines your gender identity right on there as being based on your personality, your job, your hobbies, your likes and dislikes, roles in society, and expectations upon you. What does your job have to do with your gender? If a female is an astronaut, does that put her on the male end of the spectrum? They believe that your gender is on a spectrum. And what's that based on? It's all based on stereotypes. Really, what are sexist, regressive stereotypes of what it means to be a boy, a girl, a man, or a woman? And I have this expression that there's no right way to be a boy or a girl, because there isn't. If a boy is a bit more effeminate, guess what? He's still a boy.
Right.
That doesn't make him a girl. And if a girl is a tomboy and she wants to chase lizards and climb trees and play in the dirt and hates dresses and wants short hair, she is 100% a beautiful girl. She's probably the type of girl that you want to marry when she grows up. That she's going to be more fun. But she's a girl. But this whole ideology hinges on stereotypes and teaches kids that are gender non-conforming that they're trans. So what is gender dysphoria? Gender dysphoria is this terminology used in the DSM-5. It used to be called gender identity disorder until 2013. They changed it. I think it was upsetting the activists that they called it a disorder because they don't consider this to be a disorder at all anymore. This is not treated as though it's a mental health issue, even though it's in the DSM-5. And by the way, it's in the DSM-5 so they can bill for it, because they have to have insurance codes to bill the insurance companies so they can get paid. So they diagnose this child with gender dysphoria, but they don't actually consider it a mental health disorder anymore. These activists in these children's hospitals who work at the gender clinics don't think it's a mental disorder. And the trend today is no therapy. To even suggest that these children should get therapy is to invalidate their gender identity. And the activists want you to believe that, well, there's nothing wrong with a girl being a boy. She's just a boy. It's this inner feeling that she's a boy. Well, what does it mean to feel like a boy? I ask this question to people on the street all the time, and I've had 20,000 of these conversations out on the street. No one can tell me what it means for a girl to be a boy. Sometimes you'll get some of these activist types or just confused leftists saying, well, you know, girls like nail polish and long hair and the color pink. And I'll say, so if a boy likes pink and nail polish, does that make him a girl? Oh, no, of course not, they'll say. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just confused. What is it? And nobody can tell you because the whole thing is nonsense. And I might be a little bit like you are right now. When I first started reading about this, I thought there's got to be something to this. I mean, this is all over the world. You got all these experts, all these doctors. And the more you read and the more you read and the more you read, nope, there is nothing to this. This whole ideology is based on a lie. The entire thing is lies. It started really in the 60s with a doctor out of Johns Hopkins University named John Money. He's a psychologist there who, at least in modern history, this goes back to pre-Nazi era in Germany with a guy called Magnus Hirschfeld, but in modern era, this started with John Money. And this theory of gender identity floated around academia for decades. And then it really emerged at the end of the gay rights movement in this century because it was small. You know, some feminist scholars were teaching this whole idea that our gender is a social construct that was pushed a lot by feminism. This is coming from a lot of different directions. But when gay rights were won, you have all these LGBTQ organizations, which we should really just call TQ organizations because they've got nothing to do with the LGB today. They're all about pushing queer theory and pushing trans. Well, they achieved their objectives with gay rights. They're not going to close up shop. They got to keep everyone employed. They got to keep the donations flowing. So their new objectives turned to trans rights. And they've been successful in using fear tactics and cries of bigotry to silence the entire population. Because if you were to say anything about this, they would call you a bigot, say you're anti-LGBTQ, and people were afraid of losing their jobs. But that fear that has kept people silent, I think, is slowly evaporating. And anyway, they push trans rights as some new human rights movement. And today, now we have all these scholars who don't even know what a woman is. Mm-hmm. And we have tampons in all the federal facilities throughout Canada in men's washrooms. And this is happening on university campuses, and the world's just gone totally insane. But we have some pushback coming. It's just this culture war going on where the red states are trying to fix this and blue states are doubling down and trying to make you a criminal if you won't transition your kid. So anyway, there's really nothing to gender ideology. I have this expression that we have two sexes, zero genders, and infinite personalities, because that just sums up everybody beautifully. And we need to get away from calling it gender. We should just call it sex, because that's what it is.
So if this, like, I appreciate you outlining some of the history of this stuff. It goes back to the 60s and stuff, but I don't remember my parents or even when I was younger ever hearing any of this stuff. It really feels like it's coming on the last few years. So like, what do you think is causing that in the last few years, and how many years would you define that it's been more pushed than before?
Really, this exploded around 2015.
Oh, really?
Even a little bit before that, but it's the advent of the smartphone, social media, kids on social media. Every single child who's identifying as trans, you'd be hard-pressed to find one who doesn't have some social media influence going on. These are the misfit kids. These are not the high school quarterbacks and the cheerleaders. These are kids with autism. In about half of these cases, these children have autism. According to the Tavistock, which was the biggest gender clinic in the world, it was where all the kids in England went to. Their waiting list right now is 15,000 children, but they're not going to give these kids puberty blockers anymore. But
what? Sorry, that was actually,
their own.
Let me stop you for a sec. That was one of the definitions I'd like from you. Like, what is a gender clinic? What do they do?
So they transition kids. They give them these drugs and hormones and refer them off for surgery. So all the children's hospitals, pretty much all the big ones today, will have this one little corner of their hospital where these people see what they call trans youth. Now, I don't call them trans youth. I call them girls and boys because there's no such thing as a transgender child. that they don't need this label. These are girls and boys with distress of some sort. And about half of them are on the autism spectrum. This place in England called the Tavistock, per their own data from over 1,000 children, was the sample size. 35% had moderate to severe autism. Never mind the more mild cases. These kids are in state care in many instances. Up here in British Columbia, we've got one psychologist transitioning over 1,000 kids, including more than 500 in state care. 8% of all the children in state care in British Columbia are being transitioned by this one psychologist, who then sends them to the children's hospital where they get the drugs and hormones.
Oh, man.
And per other data in the States, kids in state care are, depends on the data, about 10 times more likely. In many cases, these kids have been sexually abused. Girls who've been sexually abused aren't going to be loving being a girl right now. Especially if this has been some chronic thing, which it often is. And, you know, traditionally these kids would trying to be hiding their sex. You know, they'll walk around with hoodies on and baggy pants, and they're trying to hide their bodies. Well, now these kids will say that they're trans. Because if you offer these girls an escape route where they can escape their sex, which for them is the source of their trauma, of course, some of them are going to take you up on it. And historically, a lot of these kids with this so-called gender dysphoria, this distress associated with their sex, a lot of them grew up to be gay. Gender dysphoria, as we used to call it, affected, I mean, they still call it that. It affected boys about 2 to 1 versus girls. And it was maybe 1 out of 30,000 kids. This was a very rare thing. And these were effeminate little boys. This was starting early in life. It wasn't starting when they were 13, 14 years old, like what we see today. But according to all the different studies that were done before we started giving kids puberty blockers, before they started drugging these kids, more than 80% of the time when they went through puberty, they outgrew this condition. Their gender dysphoria desisted. It went away. And a majority grew up to be gay. Most recent study that finished before this madness of puberty blockers followed 139 boys from the age of 5 all the way into their 20s. 87.8% of them outgrew it. 63.6% grew up to be gay. So the solution, the cure, is puberty. It's growing up. It's time.
Yeah.
Leave the kids alone. Talk therapy. Watchful waiting. Why are you medicalizing kids? Why are you affirming a delusion that a child is something they are not? It's total madness. But now they don't leave these kids alone. They start them on puberty blockers, and then part of that is they're always signing up for the next step, which is the opposite sex's hormones. And together, these are sterilizing kids. After 4 or 5 years on testosterone, these girls have to get a hysterectomy. Sometimes they're cutting out their ovaries as well. So now they can never produce estrogen for the rest of their life. They're sending teenage girls into menopause and calling it love.
Oh, man.
They're castrating boys. Under 18, it's being done. Of course, most of the time it's done 18 and up, but it is being done on 16-year-olds. We know this for a fact. Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, California has admitted to it on video. I tweet out this video all the time. They've cut off the breasts of 12-year-old girls at that same clinic. There's a girl who's suing right now. Her name's Layla Jane. Harmeet Dillon, the woman who ran to be the chair of the RNC, is her lawyer. And Layla was just 13 years and 1 month old when they cut off her breasts. She has autism. She'd had other issues. Chloe Cole, a lot of people will know about her. She was 15 when they did a double mastectomy. She was 13 when they gave her puberty blockers and testosterone. She's also on the autism spectrum. She had a sexual abuse. A boy in school had groped her. And that made her want to get her breasts cut off. And so there's no safeguarding. All these people at these gender clinics do, these doctors, all they do is affirm. They don't challenge anything. They affirm the delusion. You say you're a boy? Congratulations. We're so glad you found your true self. You're a boy. We think you're an excellent candidate for puberty blockers, which, by the way, cost about $40,000 per year for the implant. They'll implant this thing in their upper arm or their thigh, or they'll give them a shot every couple of months. But yeah, these are just kids with distress of some other sort. And now they're being treated as though gender is the underlying problem for all of it. And they're giving them sex changes without any evidence that this helps them long term, without any knowledge of the long-term health effects. Well, we do have a lot of the knowledge, but there's never been a single study on this. And they haven't conducted any systematic reviews of the evidence in the US. The AAP is finally doing one now because of pressure, but I don't trust them to do it honestly.
So who is pushing all of this then? Who stands to benefit? You just mentioned if they're $40,000 per that procedure, it seems obvious that it's money, but like, why do people want this to happen? Who's benefiting?
So there's no one answer to this. There are, of course, people who are profiting from this.
Mm-hmm.
There are surgeons who are making, quick $10,000 per double mastectomy, maybe $40,000 for what they call bottom surgery, which is a euphemism for castration and inverting the penis to form what they call a neovagina. But there are true believers. This is like a religion. I consider this to be a cult for all practical purposes. And there are a lot of true believers. There's been a lot of propaganda that kids will kill themselves if we don't transition them. That's the number one thing you'll hear every single time from these trans activists. And it's a lie. A study just out of Finland this past week proves it's a lie, because they looked at, I think it was 2,000 cases of children over the years, and then they used a sample size of, I think it was 16,000. Don't quote me on that, but it was about 8-1 versus kids who had not transitioned. And it showed that suicides weren't going up if kids weren't transitioning, that the suicide rate was in line with kids who were struggling with mental health difficulties. So if you look at kids with autism, for example, their suicide rate is higher. If you look at kids with eating disorders, their suicide rates are higher. On average, these kids have 3 or 4 other comorbidities going on when they're being transitioned. They're not higher. They don't have higher suicidality because they're trans. They have higher suicidality because they have mental health issues going on. And there's no evidence that suicides go up if you don't transition them. At the Tavistock, over 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, there were 4 suicides. 2 were kids on the waiting list, which is now 15,000. 2 were kids who were being transitioned. But that actual suicide rate is very, very low. It's in line with what it's always been. And yes, of course, every suicide is a tragedy, and I'm not trying to downplay that. But you don't solve suicidality. You don't solve a problem with the mind. You don't fix mental distress by sterilizing children and mutilating their bodies. That's completely insane. But this argument that they'll kill themselves is used to silence debate, to shut up people like you and me, and it's used to coerce parents to go along with this, because they will literally be told by these ideologues in these gender clinics, Mom and Dad, you can have a dead son or a live daughter. I mean, how awful is that to hear? How ridiculous is it to even say? These people are nuts, to be honest with you. It doesn't matter that they have MD at the end of their name. Doctors are not immune to joining cults. And a lot of these doctors, by the way, identify as trans themselves who are doing this. So you've got people who are in the cult hurting kids who've been indoctrinated into the cult. So we shouldn't have these people who identify as trans writing the standards of care. It's like the insane asylum is being run by the insane. The inmates have taken over the asylum. That's what's happened in some of these medical organizations. We need to get back to reality and look at the evidence for helping these kids. And we should never be altering their body, because there's no such thing as a transgender child.
So what is it beyond the money then that, like, why are people trying to push this? Because when I was reaching out to you and wanted to talk to you, it was like, it seems pretty obvious we shouldn't be harming kids. That's like a lot of what society is trying to do, and that's what every parent wants to do. For the most part, you don't want to intervene medically with your kid if you don't have to, right? These are all such basic things that I've literally never met somebody who has the opposite opinion. So there's the money that the surgeons can make, but there's got to be something more beyond it. Who are the people that are pushing this, and why beyond the money? Or is
so this is really pushed by the far left. These are radicals. These are extremists. And I say all the time, the Democratic Party and other leftist political parties throughout the West, they've essentially been taken hostage by the far left of their party, because the more moderate members aren't allowed to speak up against any of this, because the second they do, they're shouted down and decried as a bigot by other members of their own party. They won't get funding for their campaigns. This is pushed by the Human Rights Campaign, by the ACLU, which considers itself to be a civil liberties union, which now will sue you if you stop sterilizing kids. All these states that have legislated a stop to this are all being sued by the ACLU because they say that it's a violation of civil rights not to be sterilizing, mutilating children. I mean, these institutions have been completely captured by radicals, straight up communists in many of these cases. And the entire left has been too afraid to speak up. Planned Parenthood is now the #1 provider of cross-sex hormones in the United States. So this is good versus evil. Evil exists. Bad people exist. Mentally ill people exist. And mentally ill and bad people have succeeded through propaganda in making this some sort of civil rights campaign. Because people were too afraid to speak up, because then they're said to be anti-LGBTQ. This is really a subset of queer theory. Gender ideology is a subset of queer theory, and queer theory wants to destroy, the people who push this want to destroy all norms in society. They don't like the nuclear family. They think heteronormativity is oppressive, and they think everything should go. These are the same people who want to make pedophilia legal. They don't consider them pedophiles. They want to call them minor attracted persons. They say that pedophilia is just a sexual orientation, that it's innate, that you can't help it, and we shouldn't stigmatize these poor fellas. This is literally what they say all day long. There are many professors who speak like this. There are people working at these medical facilities who speak like this. And so, what can I say? This is a full-blown cult that has permeated the West. You have a lot of true believers, and you'll have a lot of people who've been deceived. Because like any cult, there's something attractive that pulls you in at first. So you've got all these young women going through their gender studies classes in universities, and they're being told that they're helping children to be who they really are. It's preying on their natural compassion. They're told that these kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition them, because they were born wrong, and they can't help this feeling. And it preys on this natural compassion and the agreeableness as well of women, because statistically speaking, according to the big 5 personality traits, agreeableness being one of them, women are more agreeable. They're less likely to rock the boat. They want to fit in with the crowd more. And you have a lot of young women being deceived by lies in university. And then they go out into the world and they become the social workers and the teachers and the counselors and the human rights workers, the human resources, the HR employees, as well as the human rights workers. All these positions of influence where these kids come to, where they're not being challenged, they're having their delusions affirmed because they're deceived themselves. And like any cult, the victim of the cult, which a lot of these young women are at first, they become the recruiters. And so now you get this cycle perpetuating. Not all these people are in this for money at all, but this is like a true belief system that has evolved, and the cycle is now perpetuated. And if we don't put a stop to it, it'll go on forever. But we will put a stop to it, and we will break this cycle, because this is just the latest craze that has affected humanity. It's nothing new. Humans do weird things all the time, like lobotomies, for example.
Mm-hmm. The parents, I would think, as a baseline, most parents want to do right by their kids. So if a kid comes to the parent and wants to do this or something, the puberty blockers or something like that, and the parents go along with it, what do you think's motivating them, the parents, to do that in those situations?
So a lot of parents are against this, and a lot of parents are terrified because their child has been indoctrinated into this cult at school and online, and they find out about it too late. And parents don't have rights to stop this in many cases. In many cases, it's also parents pushing this, particularly the mothers. It's usually the mothers who are pushing this, not the fathers. And an older study that was done showed that 52% of the mothers of these boys with gender identity disorder, 52% of the mothers had borderline personality disorder, compared to just 6% in the general population. So in many cases, it's the mom or both parents. It's usually the moms pushing this. But today we've had this explosion where 300,000 kids have gender dysphoria, according to data reported on by the New York Times last year. And a lot of parents feel helpless and are terrified. Like my friend Erin Friday in your great state of California. She's leading the ballot initiative down there to put a stop to this. But she's a lifelong Democrat. And she found out that her daughter had been socially transitioned at school. So social transition is the business of using a new name and new pronouns. So her own daughter was going by a boy's name and he, him pronouns at school, and the school hid it from her.
Oh, wow.
That's the policy in California. Teachers have been fired for saying they won't hide this from parents. I've met some of them. We've spoken at events together. And so she found out, and for the next few years, it's a struggle to bring your child back to reality for a lot of these parents. It can take years. And I work with some of these parents, and I've seen many of their children, almost always girls, go through this phase and come out of it. And now they're getting closer to 18, 19, and they're more comfortable being female. This is nothing new. Puberty's hard. It's especially hard for girls. I give these talks and I'll ask the women in the audience, who here loved going through puberty growing up?
Right.
Not one arm has yet gone up in the air.
Yeah.
So this is natural time of discomfort and anxiety. They're growing up.
Yeah.
But leave them alone. So anyway, a lot of parents are against this. So it depends on the situation. But you get these radical leftists with their own cluster B personality disorders pushing this on their kids as well.
How would you handle it if one of your daughters either had said at school they wanted to be called a boy, or if they didn't feel like they were in the right body? How would you go about that?
Well, I mean, I don't deal with hypotheticals too much. That would literally never happen in my household. This is almost always happening in these more liberal households. Mm-hmm. But I've had conversations with my girls for years about this. You know, you give them little bits of information when the time is right. You instill in them that there's no right way to be a girl, that you're beautiful just as you are.
Yeah.
And you talk to them a little bit about what's going on, and you educate them, and you arm them with the truth, so that when these lies eventually come for them, they'll just bounce off. And the number one thing you need to do is keep your kids off social media, because all these kids have some social media influence. My kids have never been on social media. They don't want it. They came to that decision on their own, primarily because of talks with me. But I didn't tell them you can't be on it. I just kind of talked it through and made them think about the ramifications themselves. I remember one day my daughter, she was in dance at the time, and some other friends in grade 6 were uploading their dance videos to TikTok. And I just said, and she wanted to do one. And I said, okay, well, who do you think is going to watch your videos? Yeah. And she said, you know, my friends. And okay, and who else might watch them? And she went through the thought process herself. I was like, do you think some of their dads might watch them? Oh, yeah. And then who else on the internet? It could be anybody. And she didn't like that thought. Mm-hmm. And that was it. She didn't want to do it. And they understand. They also know, because of me and all the abuse I get online, that, you know, it's a very nasty place, the online world. But if they don't get addicted to it in the first place, they're not losing out on anything. Yeah. They're living a normal life. And Dr. Phil, who has been very quiet on these issues for a long time, but he's finally coming around. He gave a talk with Jesse Waters on Fox News the other night, where he said that starting in both 2008 and 2009, and this speaks to one of your questions earlier, really around 2008, 2009, we started to see anxiety increase with kids. We saw suicidality start to increase. And it was with the smartphone, kids on their phone. And it increased and increased and increased. And then when COVID hit, it got another big bump.
Yep.
Because kids are the most unhealthy mentally that they've ever been right now, at this time in history. And so he worded it so beautifully. He said kids stopped living their own lives and started watching other kids live theirs.
Yeah. So dangerous.
So that's the trap that parents need to keep their kids out of. Your kids need to live their own lives. They need to go outside. Look at the human race from an evolutionary perspective. What did we do for a couple 100,000 years? And do more of that.
Yeah.
Which means no phones.
Yeah.
Get off the computer, get off the video games, go play outside with other kids. That's what they need to be doing. And those kids work out fine. They're not the ones who are struggling with this business. These kids are all getting into this weird cultish thing online. And then it's being affirmed at school. And then they're joining these groups at school called gender and sexuality alliances, where they get love bombed and they get indoctrinated further. And they're misfits already, but they find this group at school where they're offering free lunch or free pizza or cookies or whatever. And now where they were this misfit kid, now they have all this love and attention, and now they have a special new identity, which brings them more love. And now they're special and they're being celebrated and they're getting these dopamine hits.
Yeah.
And they're being taught that the reason they had all this discomfort this whole time was because they were really trans.
Yeah.
And they fall for this. So there's many angles to this that we need to shut down, but it all is downstream from creating awareness. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. And the thing about the social media stuff is like, with what Dr. Phil said, you're actually watching other people's fake lives, not even their real lives. So you're comparing falsely to somebody else looks like every day is amazing and your days are not amazing. And it's just the best part or even a fake staged part of your life. It's so dangerous for kids. I think it's, I think the social media stuff's improving with kids. Like I have, say, friends or cousins that have kids that are in their 20s, and I think they're going through something harder with they went through something harder with the social media stuff than I will with a 6 and 4-year-old. Cause like we kind of all, for the most part, I thought we're starting to get it. Do you think the social media like grasp on how damaging it is to kids? Do you think that's getting better or getting worse over the years?
I think a lot of parents are cluing in. I mean, this is up to the parents to clue in. Because what do the kids know? They've been on this planet 7-8 years.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And this is all they've ever known. So it's up to the parents to do a better job. But I think they are cluing in more. We understand. We should have known this intuitively, and many of us did, but we understand how damaging it is. And I think a lot of parents are pushing back more than they were. It's a very frustrating thing to go to a restaurant and see a kid on the phone the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's still a lot of that going on. Yep. But social media companies themselves have a lot to answer for because the way they structure their algorithm, the way they write that code is making these kids worse because it's feeding this constant diet of these lies to these kids. As soon as they Google something trans, or as soon as they search or get into some trans group in Facebook, they're going to be fed more and more and more of the same content. Yeah. And yeah. So, yeah, these social media companies are a total mess. I mean, they're all progressive and they're a big part of the problem. So we have a lot of work to do as parents, but also legislatively and in bringing some accountability to these companies because they shoulder a lot of the blame as well.
Yeah. I mean, if, let's say, you're not a big hypothetical guy, but I'm going to throw another one at you. If someone felt strongly that they were in the wrong body or wanted a gender change surgery, what age do you think legally would be the right one to say, go ahead, you can make your own decision here?
So first of all, what does it mean to be born in the wrong body?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of that. I don't think it means
too much.
We shouldn't be, you found.
We shouldn't be acknowledging that this is a thing.
Yeah, fair enough.
This shouldn't. So that in this hypothetical, the first thing that should come back to this person is, well, you're not born in the wrong body, because there is no such thing. You are your body. You're not born wrong. Whether you believe in God or evolution, this makes no sense. If you believe in God, this ideology teaches that God made us wrong, that God made some mistakes. If you believe in evolution, this ideology teaches that somehow 1 billion years of the process of natural selection has failed, and we now need a pharmaceutical company to help you be your true self. There are billions of processes going on in our bodies every day that we don't understand. We have these amazing biological systems going on that took a very long time to evolve. And now we're playing God with these children's bodies. But to answer your question about the age, what transition is body modification, is what it really is. You're not transitioning to anything. You're modifying your body, and you're hurting your body. So what have doctors sworn an oath to do? They swore an oath to first do no harm. So they are not order takers. They're not people sitting in a drive-thru at McDonald's where someone comes in and says, I'd like a Big Mac and fries. Or they're not someone sitting there where someone comes in and says, I'd like a double mastectomy.
Yeah.
They don't just take orders. They have a more noble purpose than that. They are there to provide healthcare, which includes mental health care. And they should be screening for trauma. They should be screening for abuse. They should be treating the other coexisting mental health comorbidities first. If a woman who's 25 years old wants to get her tubes tied after her first child, a lot of doctors will say no, because they know the regret rate. And they know that 5 years later, this woman is going to be wanting to have another child. But with this, we just take a 14-year-old at their word that they were born wrong, and we ignore their own parents' wishes in many cases. Their parents don't even have to give consent. Sometimes the state takes these children away from their parents. This is happening in California. But is there a magic switch when they hit 18 where they're suddenly a different person? No, of course not. And in our brains, our prefrontal cortexes are developing until we're 25. And an autism expert tells me it's closer to 30 for these kids who are neurodivergent. So I don't think we should be doing this to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds at all. I did incredibly stupid things when I was 20.
Yeah.
And I wasn't struggling with mental health disorders, but I was still a dumb kid.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they should be looking at all these other things first. Can you stop an adult from doing things to their own body? No. But doctors don't have to do it. If I was a doctor, I would never do it. Ever. So doctors need to start taking responsibility to provide actual health care instead of just being order takers and trying to make money. But I don't think there is a magic age. In Missouri, the Attorney General introduced some guidelines where there needed to be 12 or 13 mental health appointments over a period of a year at least, and they need to screen for trauma and abuse, and they need to eliminate other mental health comorbidities. And then if some adult wants to do it, well, fine, I guess. I don't agree with it, but I don't think you're ever going to stop adults from modifying their body. But ultimately, if we do away with this ideology, if we expose this ideology for the ridiculous, regressive garbage that it is, you will have such a small number of these cases that it won't be such a thing to worry about. You're not going to have hundreds of thousands of kids wanting to transition like we have right now. It'll go back to 1 out of 30,000 like it used to be.
Yeah, if there was no narrative, no marketing, nothing around it, let's say you could remove all of that and go back to like the Stone Age, what percentage of humans do you think would feel this way, like they want to transition in some way to a different gender? Do you think it exists at all, that feeling, or is it all a construct?
Well, sure. I mean, feelings exist, but these are like mental health disorders.
Yeah.
This is distress of some sort. And as we mentioned before, even when this affected hardly any of the boys, 1 out of 30,000.
Yeah.
Well, in most of those cases, it was their mother with borderline personality disorder. And I guarantee if you look closer into these cases, you'll find all sorts of abuse and trauma and all sorts of things. So no one ever had this idea that they are actually the opposite sex until we put it in their heads.
Yeah.
Gender dysphoria didn't exist until John Money invented this concept of gender identity. You can be feminine, little boy.
Yeah.
You can be masculine, little girl. That's okay. That's okay. You're still a girl and a boy. That's the message. So dress however you want.
Yeah.
Sleep with whoever you please. This is what J.K. Rowling wrote in her famous tweet in December of 2019, which apparently made her a transphobe. Dress however you please, sleep with whoever you want, but fire women for stating that sex is real? Total nonsense. And this, what's going on with kids, is much worse than any of that, because this is causing irreversible damage.
The 1 in 30 or 40,000 stat you mentioned there got me thinking about. I saw what you were going back and forth with Eric Weinstein on Twitter recently. I think he mentioned, and just tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but that there's these probably extreme anomalies where a person has some male and some female organs, some sort of a
sure. So he mentioned persistent Müllerian duct syndrome. So
what does that mean?
So first of all, in this podcast, Eric Weinstein said that there are more than two sexes, more than two genders. No, there's not. There's not. And he brought up people who have what are called disorders of sexual development. So this condition, this is not one condition. This is a variety of medical disorders because things went a little haywire during the embryo's development. Mm-hmm. So, for example, he cited this thing called persistent Müllerian duct syndrome. And when the embryo is developing, our genes determine whether we become male or female. And in the beginning, there's this structure that might lead to become a uterus and the fallopian tubes. But the genes result in the male gonads being developed, and this structure that would have formed into a uterus basically disintegrates. Okay? But in some of these cases, there's this hormone that would have caused that structure to disintegrate, which didn't release properly, didn't develop. And so it's called persistent Müllerian duct syndrome because the uterus ends up developing along with the fully male genitalia. So these people are fully male. They've got XY chromosomes. They produce sperm, the male gamete. Okay? Our sex is actually determined by the gametes that we produce, not by our chromosomes, because there are chromosomal abnormalities. But these people are fully male, but they actually have this useless uterus inside. It doesn't mean they're not male. They're men. But he tried to use this as an example. What do we put on their birth certificate? Male or female? Well, we put male, Eric Weinstein, because they're male. And this was frustrating to me when he was bringing this up, because there are really only three arguments you ever hear from these trans activists, which is kids are going to kill themselves. Puberty blockers are reversible. No, they're not, because time isn't reversible. You're blocking puberty in these children for years. These boys end up with a micropenis for life. They're not going to suddenly go through puberty when they're 20 years old. Those years of development are gone. And then the third thing you hear is really an attempt to obfuscate or to change the subject. You'll get these trans activists saying, well, what about intersex people? Well, what about them? They're all male or female. These are a variety of different conditions. And you treat them by knowing what their actual sex is. There are some people who don't produce enough testosterone, for example, and they will have medical difficulties because of this. They're fully male, and you help them by giving them testosterone, or you help the women by giving them estrogen. There's a whole bunch of different conditions. Something like 13 different karyotypes, different chromosomal structures. But anyway, it's just false what he was saying. But he was doing a big favor to these trans activists, spreading this myth that there are more than two sexes, and trying to make the trans argument about these people with these disorders of their sexual development. And by the way, the people who have these disorders hate being lumped in with this trans argument. They hate it because it's got nothing to do with trans. And so what he did there is just confused thousands more people who now think that there are people walking around as hermaphrodites or something. And there aren't. There is no true hermaphroditism in humans. It doesn't exist. We're all male or female. And so, yeah, I just corrected him on that point. And he got really upset with me. And that's fine, because I'm not here to make friends. I'm just here to tell the truth.
Yeah, and do you know how often that type of one of those abnormalities would happen in
Yeah.
out of a million people or something?
So all these different conditions, it's about 0.018%. Trans activists like to say that these people are as common as redheads.
Oh, wow.
But it's about 0.018%. So that's 1 out of 5,000 people, not even. And even amongst that percentage, it's very rare to have any ambiguity with their genitalia at birth. In some cases, the testicles might not have dropped. They might be internalized, or the penis might not have really formed. But when puberty comes, it will. So in some cases, they might look more female at birth, but they're fully male. Things are just internalized. But this is not what we're talking about. This has nothing to do with this discussion of trans and puberty blockers and gender ideology. It's just something that trans activists use to distract from the conversation and to confuse people. And Eric Weinstein did a great job of doing that himself, even though his sister-in-law is an evolutionary biologist. He needs to go talk to her some more.
So I am curious, like if let's say an adult wanted to transition, this is what I don't get either. If a woman wanted to become a man, what is possible with these surgeries? Can they actually become a man, or what do they end up?
No,
yeah,
of
so
course
what?
not. You can't change your sex.
Right.
You can change your appearance. You can make
It's
yourself
all
appear more.
appearance.
It's all appearance. A man is someone who does or did or will or would, if not for genetic abnormalities, produce sperm. And a woman is someone who does or did or will or would, if not for genetic abnormalities, produce eggs. That's how you define female and male. So with the women, what do? They give them testosterone. So they'll grow a beard. And to be honest, women will pass. They'll appear more like the opposite sex more easily than men. They might just look like a really small man. Mm-hmm. But when you see someone with a beard and a deeper voice because of testosterone, you don't really think they're a woman. Your brain just doesn't go there. When you see a man trying to look like a woman, well, he's 6 foot tall and he's got big broad shoulders and facial hair and a deep voice. Mm-hmm. He's not going to pass so well as a woman. And the idea of these puberty blockers is to keep these kids looking neutral. If I were to steel man their argument, if I were to prevent their case, they say, well, it's important to keep them looking neutral and then give them the opposite sex's hormones so that they can pass better as an adult. That's the whole reason for the puberty blockers. Oh. But when it comes to the females, you don't need to do that at all because they're going to pass when you give them testosterone. So what are they doing this to 12 and 13-year-olds? Now, it's a terrible thing to do to girls or boys, but the girls pass better than the boys do once boys develop into men. But what are they going to do? They're going to cut off their breasts. They're going to give them testosterone. They're going to get a deep voice. They're going to get hair all over their body. They're going to end up getting a hysterectomy. They're not going to be able to have kids. And in some of the cases, now most women don't do this, but in some of the cases, they will cut out the flesh from their forearm or their thigh. And they will fashion that into a fake phallus, which they then attach to their groin. And it doesn't do anything. Yeah. It doesn't work. They'll run the urethra through it so they can pee out of it, but it doesn't do anything else. Yeah. And this is just grotesque, harmful mutilation. It causes, of course, tons of surgical complications. And there's one famous case of Scott Nugent. This is a woman originally from Texas who had this procedure done when she was, I think, 42 years of age. And she's still having problems with her forearm, nerve damage, and all sorts of things. She almost died. I think she's had to spend about $1 million because of infections inside this neophallus. And it's just totally insane is what it is. Most women don't go that far, but some of them do. And it's being celebrated in the media as a beautiful thing.
Well, that would be the one main flaw in all of this is if you want to transition from a woman to a man, it's not actually possible.
Correct.
So the whole movement, the whole movement actually is not even, you can't even deliver on the promise.
Of course not. It's just about appearance.
Yeah.
And these people will say that they're happier. And you'll see these polls. These are all really self-selected participants in these online polls. They're not proper scientific studies at all. But if you ask these people, are they happier? They're going to say yes. Of course, they're going to say yes. If you ask a Scientologist working 100 hours a week for their C organization, they call it, doing manual labor, cleaning toilets, getting in trouble, doing whatever the boss tells them to do, not seeing their family for years at a time. If you ask them if they're happier, they're all going to say yes, because that's what cult members do. If you look at Elliot Page right now, does Elliot Page look happy? Or formerly Ellen Page? No. She looked much happier before. I have had hundreds of these youth, young adults who've transitioned come up to me on the street and at university campuses. Literally hundreds. And they're yelling. They're crying. Sometimes they're shaking. They're never smiling. They're a mess. But if you ask them, are they happier? Yes, they're going to say they're happier. But it means nothing. Of course they're going to say that. They're chasing this fantasy of becoming the opposite sex. And they're in a cult. So what they say about how they feel versus how they actually are and how they present in society are two totally different things.
So there's a few ways this is being pushed, and I kind of want you to try to break down what's happening through each channel. So as you've mentioned, it's the ideology, which is like changing the culture or the view of this. Then there's the education, which is actually like changing what's being taught in schools, right? And there's changing what's legal, which is the government intervention. Of those paths, which one is sort of scaring you the most right now?
So government is probably the most scary, because what's happening in some of these Western countries, including Canada, right now with this new hate speech bill that they're proposing, is they're trying to silence the population. And good luck prosecuting people for hate speech, but what they do is they put a chill across the entire society and everyone's afraid to speak up. And they're pushing this, and they're criminalizing parents who try to stop it. They're taking kids away from parents. In California, there's a woman named Abigail Martinez who, when her daughter was, I don't know, I guess she was about 13. She was just starting in high school. They originally immigrated from El Salvador. And her daughter, Yaley, grew up a normal girly girl, but she got into high school. She started getting teased about her body, and she was having a rough time. And she joined the school's Gender and Sexuality Alliance, where she came to believe that the reason for her difficulties was because she was really trans. And the school socially transitioned her without her mother's knowledge. Oh, wow. So eventually her mom, Abigail, found out. And she was much more accommodating to this than I would have been. She was okay with going along with the new pronouns, but she knew her girl didn't need testosterone, because she knew this was a phase and her daughter was just going through a tough time. Because guess what? Parents know their children better than the government does.
Yeah.
Anyway, the government took custody of Yaley. They took her away from her mom. They put her in a group home with boys. They put her on testosterone. And while she was on testosterone, separated from her mom, she knelt down in front of a train.
Oh, man.
And police had to pick her body up in pieces and tell her mom.
Oof.
The state of California killed that girl. There's a lot of cases of parents losing custody of their kids. There's a girl in Sage who was also getting socially transitioned at school in the state of Virginia. They hid it from her parents. Now, her parents are actually her grandparents, but they've raised her since she was 1 year old. So for all practical purposes, I'm just going to call them her parents. This girl was getting socially transitioned at school. Her real name is Sage. She was going by the name Draco. This was hidden from her parents. She was talking to some people online. She went to meet up with one of these people online, and she was sex trafficked, kidnapped, trafficked from Virginia into DC, and then into Maryland. They found her a couple months later. She'd been locked in a room, drugged, gang raped, and was being used for porn. They got her out of there. Did they return her home to her very normal and loving parents? No, because her parents called her by her real name, Sage, and called her a girl. And unbelievably, the I don't know, the prosecutor, whatever his title is in Maryland, started an investigation into the parents. And what did they do with Sage after this ordeal she'd just been through? They put her in a group home with boys.
Oh, man.
She'd just been raped for months, drugged. They put her in a group home with boys where, totally not shockingly, she was assaulted again. She ran away. She was trafficked again, found 2 or 3 months later in Texas, where the same thing had happened all over again. Locked in a room, drugged, raped, used for porn. So now she's back home. And they're trying to pass a law in Virginia called Sage's Law. And this story is one that I made go viral a couple years ago. I think it was the grandmother herself who had written up this story. But I made it go viral on X, and it was seen a few million times. And now there's a law they're trying to pass called Sage's Law, which would simply require schools to inform parents when their child has a new name and pronouns at school. And the Democrats keep stopping it. This is very divided politically. Now, the Democrats on the street, the voters, they don't all support this. Guess what? If you're a Democratic voter, you don't want schools hiding from you that your child has a new name and pronouns. Your child's going through an identity crisis. And these 24-year-old teachers with no training at all are doing damaging psychological interventions on your child and not telling you. So Democrats don't like that either, the voters. But the politicians, they just answer to Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and the Human Rights Campaign and all these radical activists. GLAAD. And they won't speak up. They try to stop all this. And now in California, they're trying to make it so that, well, they've already made it so that kids from anywhere in the union can run away from home to California and they won't return the kid home. A non-custodial spouse could bring the daughter to California to get transitioned and they won't return the kid home. They will ignore subpoenas, court orders, arrest warrants, and custody agreements so that they can transition the child. And a lot of blue states are doing this. And they're taking away parental rights. They're making it so that parental consent is not needed at any age. So they're all doubling down in these blue states. But we just got to keep creating awareness. And eventually we're going to get there. But we got to fight on our hands with what are really a bunch of child abusing, weak, cowardly politicians.
Again, I'm just so baffled that this is getting traction at all, because it seems like even if it were true, it seems like such a niche thing. I don't how big have you gone with the conspiracy theories? I guess obviously there's some theories out there. Well, it's not theories, but plenty of powerful people would want fewer people on the planet. And if you were to have people get these surgeries, they wouldn't be able to reproduce, and you'd have, in theory, fewer people on the planet. So is it tied? Do you think it's tied into something much bigger in a movement around the world?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy at all. I look at the evidence. This is a social contagion. This is not impacting enough children to actually alter the course of the population of the planet. You're not going to reduce the population by 1 billion people by transitioning tens of thousands of kids. So I hear that all the time.
But if you got rid of the idea of sexes, it would eventually, if that would be successful.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to be successful. Does this harm the people who want to? Do the people who want depopulation mind this? Probably not. Mm-hmm. But is this some grand conspiracy by a few people in elite levels to depopulate the planet by convincing kids they're trans? No, this has been going on. They started giving puberty blockers to kids in the 90s in Holland. And this was just really started small. It was imported into the United States in the first gender clinic in Boston in 2007. So that was the first one. And one of the women who started it in Boston and was formerly one of the heads of the U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health is a woman named Laura Edwards Leeper. She wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post a year and a half or two ago, where she herself is speaking out against what's happening now because all the safeguards that they used to have in place have evaporated. When this was imported into the U.S., really through activism, they eliminated safeguards. Under the Dutch protocol, the original way they did this, they wouldn't give cross-sex hormones to kids until they were 16. Now they're doing it at any age. And Johanna Olsen-Kennedy, who runs the gender clinic at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, even got a $5.7 million grant from the NHS a few years ago. This grant went to 4 different children's hospitals. But included in that grant money was approval to give cross-sex hormones to 8-year-olds, provided they were already entering puberty. I have all the official documents. I've tweeted this out many times. Now, what the heck? They're going to give kids going through puberty at 8, that's almost exclusively going to be girls. So they're going to give testosterone to 8-year-old girls as part of research.
Wow.
This is evil. This is evil. It's not just confusion. It's not just ideology. This is evil. So this isn't making a big enough dent to help the depopulation people. But I'm sure some of them don't mind it, is my answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
This is just this idea that percolated for decades and has emerged into the mainstream because of activism from LGBTQ organizations and politicians who want a virtue signal and leftist media who want to celebrate it. This same exact story has played out before. It played out with lobotomies. The inventor of the lobotomy won a Nobel Prize in medicine. What's a lobotomy? It started off, they went through the skull. They drill holes through. But they ended up using what are essentially ice picks that they would put through your orbital sockets above your eyeballs and jab away at the prefrontal cortex of your brain. Yeah. Because these very disturbed people, I guess some of them calmed down. Yeah, that might happen if you jab away at someone's brain, not knowing what the heck you're actually doing. And this went on for a few decades. And it finally stopped. The last procedure, the person died. But we all look back at this now. I think these stopped in the 60s. And we say, my gosh, look at those ancient humans.
Right.
They were so dumb. We're so advanced and they were so dumb. Look what they were doing to people, thinking they were helping them. We're the same. Human psychology didn't change in 2 or 3 generations. We're the same as the people who lived in caves a few thousand years ago, psychologically. And we're still prone to doing ridiculous, abhorrent, awful things to other human beings because of ideology. But what happened with lobotomies? It was celebrated in the media as a miracle cure. That's what made it popular. What happened this time around? It's celebrated in the media and social media. But all the media push this. They have a reality show called I Am Jazz with a little boy since he was 4 or 5 or whatever he was, being transitioned live on TV, being called a girl. How many seasons have they run that show for? I don't know. 10, 12? I don't watch it. I can't watch it. But they did a vaginoplasty on Jazz when he was 17 years old. I hear all the time this isn't happening on minors. They did it on TV. And what happened with Jazz? Because he went on puberty blockers, his penis never grew. So what they do when they do these vaginoplasties is they castrate the boy, they slice open his penis, and they invert it to form this fake vaginal canal. But because his penis never grew, there's not enough tissue to do it. Because the fake vagina, the neo-vagina, would only be an inch or 2 deep or whatever. So what do? They cut out some of the child's colon or some of his peritoneum, which is the lining of your stomach, your abdomen. And they use that to line the inside of this neo-vagina. They're cutting out kids' colons to form fake vaginas.
Wow.
And of course there are surgical complications. One boy died during this procedure. So, and then of course, there's tons of problems afterwards. They have to dilate it for life. They have to dilate this thing for life because it's a wound and it wants to close up.
Oh, yeah.
And why are they creating this? How's that helping Jazz? So that some perverts can have sex with him? Like, I don't want to get too... But what? That's why.
Yeah.
Is that affirming him? Is that making him happier? He's gained 100 pounds. He's a mess. And who was the source of this? His mother
Oh man, that's
was
sad.
100% the source of this. He might have just grown up to be a gay man. Like most of these kids, these boys from a very young age with gender dysphoria did.
Mhm.
Instead, they've castrated and sterilized him. And he'll never have an orgasm in his life.
Yeah,
This is supposed to be loving and kind.
that's really sad. I'm yeah, so I think you're putting in the work on this, and you're envisioning it becoming the same story as the lobotomy, right? Where we look back and we say, look at how crazy those people were in 2024 and the 90s and stuff, to think about this. But like, where do you think this story is going? Is this getting worse right now? Is this getting better right now? Where does it go in 3 years, 5 years? When does it end? Give us some predictions.
2 years ago, let's get some good news going here. Sorry, everybody, for the darkness of this. 2 years ago, no one in Congress wanted to talk about this. No politicians wanted to touch it. Today, 24 states have passed legislation to put a stop to this. Not all the legislation is perfect. Georgia banned cross-sex hormones, but not puberty blockers. But I'm sure they'll get there this year. And no one wanted to talk about this. So
Yeah,
we're winning because of this education campaign. A couple things have been really big turning points, I think. Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman, made a big difference. Even though it wasn't about child transition at all, he went to these university professors, the deans of these colleges, the heads of women's studies, and he asked them what a woman is, and they couldn't answer. He didn't even offer an opinion that whole film. He just asked questions and exposed how there's absolutely nothing underpinning this ideology. There's nothing to it. It's all based on lies. None of them can define any of these terms because the whole thing's make-believe. So that was helpful in, I think, showing the population how there's absolutely nothing to this. It's all just absurd. And then in August of 2022, I tweeted out some of Boston Children's Hospital's own videos that their gender clinic had produced. The first one was this young, perky woman with this fun music playing in the background, talking about how they do gender-affirming hysterectomies with a big smile on her face at the Children's Hospital. And sometimes they cut out your ovaries too. And I tweeted that out. It's their own video from their own YouTube channel. And it started to go viral. And I thought to myself, I had better record this because they're taking a lot of heat. And I think they're probably going to delete it.
yeah.
I recorded it on my phone, just a screen recording. They deleted it that night. So then I tweeted it out again. And I sent it to Libs of TikTok and to Matt Walsh. And they retweeted it. And it went viral. So they helped me out by deleting it. Because why are they hiding their work if it's all based on science and love? Why are they hiding it? Yeah. So then simultaneously, I recorded 40 more videos they had produced from their gender clinic. They deleted them all. But I tweeted out a bunch of them. Phalloplasties, vaginoplasties, all this nonsense that they're doing. And that started a wave of conservatives looking into this issue. They started looking into other gender clinics. All these podcasters and all the media people really woke up to what was going on in these gender clinics. And then a whole bunch of reporters did their work. And now they talk about this every day, nonstop. So people are never going to unlearn that. And we're just going to keep winning. And in the red states, we are winning. 6 different countries in the world now have said that this isn't helping these kids. Now, that wasn't the politicians. That was the medical bodies. That was the professional pediatricians who conducted a review of all the evidence. So ideally, that's what needs to happen. We shouldn't have to legislate a stop to this because the medical organizations should put a stop to it themselves. Legislation is honestly a Band-Aid. The AMA, the AAP, the Endocrine Society, the American Psychological Association, they should all be condemning this because none of this is proven to help kids. But they're corrupt organizations, as we saw during COVID. They're totally corrupt. The CDC is corrupt. But eventually we will get there. It's just going to be a big fight in each state and up in Canada in each province because each state and province is responsible for their own health care. So unlike England, where you just need to convince the prime minister, let's say, or the head of the medical bodies, you fix it in the whole country. In the States, it's 50 separate battles.
Yeah. If this is tackled, at that point, what will you do next, Billboard Chris?
We got a lot of problems. So, when I was a investment guy, you kind of pay attention to everything going on in the world because you have to, because something that happens in Iraq affects your investments over here. And I've been watching for a long time the decline of our civilization and the neo-Marxification of it. And leftism is a problem. And they've rebranded things like communism as equity. There's a big pushback against that now. But there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be cultural battles to fight and things to create awareness about. So I think for the rest of my life, I'll be battling, various things associated with the downfall of our civilization. The West is under attack from a lot of different angles. And what was a pretty good culture for a very long time, people are trying to destroy. So I think I'll be involved in culture wars the rest of my life, to be honest with you. I have no intention of ever running for politics.
Yeah.
But I'll just keep growing my platform. And I think in a couple of years, I'll have, 2, 3, 4 million across different platforms. And I just speak the truth. And I think people understand that I speak the truth. I'm not one who exaggerates or goes to conspiracy theories and stuff like that. So I work with politicians all over the globe, not in Canada because they don't want to touch this, but I'm working with politicians in various countries. And because for me, this is a global battle to stop child transition. That's my focus right now, and this ideology itself. But I branch out into other areas a little bit.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking through this from a lot of the angles. If people want to read more of your work, where should they go?
So right now, X is the best place to go, at Billboard Chris. I do a little bit on Instagram. I'm not on there too much, but you'll find some videos on there, some good ones, some of my speeches, which can help educate people. And I will be getting all the platforms going pretty soon, but X is the place to go. And I have a website, which I will also be vastly improving, but it's got all the basics on there. And if people want to support me, they can donate through there, which would be very helpful because I earn approximately $0 per hour, which is okay. I'm getting by, but support is needed for doing what I'm doing. And yeah, just get educated about this, have these conversations with your friends, and protect your kids. And one day we're going to look back at this in the not too distant future and say, what the heck happened to humanity? Because we are going to put a stop to this, one conversation at a time.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time.
All right, my man. Thanks for having me.